Is that useless old woman here again?
That is what my son-in-law called me. In front of everyone. At my own table. In my own home. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you everything from the very beginning, and then you will understand how I reached the point where a single humiliating word changed my entire life. My name is Sophia Miller. I am 70 years old. And I want to tell you the story of how I became invisible in my own life. And how one day I found the strength to take my voice back. It all began 5 years ago. 5 years ago my husband passed away, Victor. Victor Miller. That was his name, and to me it was the most important sound in the world. We spent 42 years together. 42 years of happiness, arguments, reconciliations, and ordinary life that felt eternal. I believed we would grow old side by side, sitting on the porch of our home, looking out at the garden Victor loved so much. I thought we still had so much time ahead of us. But life decided otherwise. Victor died suddenly. A heart attack. That morning he was alive and well, watering his roses in the garden, quietly humming to himself. An hour later he was gone. The doctor said he did not suffer, that everything happened quickly. But that did not make it easier. I was left alone in a large, empty house where every object reminded me of him. His slippers by the bed. His mug in the kitchen. His jacket hanging by the door. I could not bring myself to put those things away. I simply could not. Before we continue, please tell us what city you are watching from. It matters to us to know how far our stories reach. During the first weeks after the funeral, I merely existed. I was not living, I was existing. I got up in the morning because I had to get up. I drank coffee because I had to drink something. I went to bed because I had to sleep. Inside there was only emptiness. Cold, heavy emptiness that filled the entire house. My daughter Valerie came to see me every week. She brought groceries, cooked meals, tried to get me to talk. But I could not. I could not speak, could not cry, could not do anything at all. I simply sat and stared out the window at Victor's garden, which was slowly being overtaken by weeds. Then about a month after the funeral, Valerie did not come alone. She brought her husband, Stephen Davis, with her. They sat with me at the kitchen table. Valerie took my hand and said quietly but firmly, "Mom, this cannot go on. You are fading before our eyes. You cannot stay here alone. Come live with us. Or we will move in with you, whatever works best for you. Just so you are not alone." I looked at her caring eyes, at her hand holding mine. And something inside me shifted. I did not want to be alone. God, how desperately I did not want to be alone in that empty house where every corner screamed with Victor's absence. "All right," I whispered. "All right, Val." Stephen nodded, looked at me with sympathy and said, "Mrs. Miller, we understand how hard this is for you right now. We will move in with you for a little while, just to support you, just so you are not alone during this time. The kids will be happy too. They love this house." I nodded gratefully. Felt like a rescue. I believed that if life returned to the house, voices, movement, noise, it would become easier. That I could survive the pain if my family was close. They moved in 2 weeks later. Valerie and Stephen and my grandchildren, 17-year-old Matthew and 14-year-old Regina. I remember that day clearly. Stephen carried boxes inside, Valerie arranged things in the rooms, and the children ran through the house, exploring every corner. The house came back to life. And for the first time in a long while I felt like I could breathe again. "We are only here for a short time, Mrs. Miller," Stephen said as he placed the last box in the living room. "Just until you get stronger. Then of course we will move back to our place." A short time. I remembered those words. A short time. But that short time turned into months. Months turned into a year. A year into 2. Then 3. Then 5. 5 years. Can you imagine that? 5 years passed after they moved in. 5 years during which something slowly but irreversibly changed in my house. In my life. In me. And you know what? When you watch this story to the very end, you will learn something shocking. You will discover who truly controlled my money all those years. My property, my accounts, my income. And that revelation will completely change how you see everything that happened in my home. Because what I uncovered was far worse than I could have imagined. But let us take things in order. First, everything was good. In the mornings I woke up not to silence but to the sounds of life. Valerie moved around the kitchen making coffee. Stephen got ready for work. The children came downstairs, arguing about something of their own. I joined them for breakfast and was greeted with smiles, kisses on the cheek and questions. "Did you sleep well, Grandma? Mom, what are we making for dinner?" It was happiness. Simple, ordinary happiness, the kind I had missed so deeply. Regina, my younger granddaughter, came into the kitchen every evening with her textbooks. She spread her notebooks across the table and said, "Grandma, can you help me with math? I do not understand these equations at all." I sat beside her, explained, drew diagrams. Regina frowned, sighed, and then suddenly understood and shouted happily, "Oh, I get it now. Thank you, Grandma." And she hugged me tightly. In those moments I felt needed, important. Not just an old woman living out her final years, but a grandmother who could help, teach, support. Matthew was older, 17, and his teenage gloom suited him. But even he found time for me. On weekends we went out into the garden together. Victor had always loved that garden, and after his death I could not bring myself to take care of it. Everything became overgrown, leaves were left untouched, the roses grew wild. Matthew took the rake, I picked up the pruning shears, and we worked in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Sometimes he asked, "Grandma, did Grandpa really plant all of this himself?" I nodded, wiping away tears when he was not looking. "Yes, Matt. With his own hands. Every tree, every bush. It was his pride." Matthew looked at the apple trees, at the roses, and I could see something changing in his expression. He was beginning to understand. To understand that the garden was not just plants. It was memory. It was love frozen in soil and leaves. Valerie worked from home. She was a designer. During the day when everyone else left for their errands, the two of us stayed behind. She sat with her laptop in the living room while I cooked lunch in the kitchen. Later we drank tea and talked about everything under the sun. Her projects. My memories. Plans for the weekend. Those were warm, cozy conversations I loved deeply. In those first months, Stephen was polite and attentive. He left early in the morning and came home tired in the evenings, but he always greeted me and asked how I was doing. "Mrs. Miller, how was your day?" he would say, taking off his jacket by the door. "Good, Steve, thank you," I replied. At dinner he thanked me for the food. "Mrs. Miller, as always, this is wonderful. Where did you learn to cook like this?" I smiled. It was pleasant. He seemed sincere. Then came my birthday. 70 years. A milestone. I did not expect anything special, but Valerie and Stephen prepared a surprise. That morning I woke up to the smell of fresh baking. I went downstairs to the kitchen and saw a set table, balloons, flowers. Valerie brought out the cake with candles. Regina and Matthew sang, "Happy Birthday," and Stephen brought out a box with a gift. "Mrs. Miller, this is from all of us," he said, handing me the beautifully wrapped package. I unwrapped it and found a lovely wool blanket, soft, warm, in my favorite beige color. "You mentioned once that you get cold in the evenings," Stephen added. "This way you will be warmer." I cried. I hugged each of them in turn. It felt as if I had found my family again. As if after Victor's death I had not been left alone. I still had them. And that was happiness. In the evenings we watched movies together as a family. We gathered in the living room, someone chose a film, Valerie made popcorn, and I wrapped myself in that very blanket they had given me. Matthew and Regina argued about which movie to put on. Stephen joked, Valerie laughed. I sat in my chair and thought, this is it. This is what makes life worth living. These moments. This warmth. This love. I believed it would always be this way. That we would live together in harmony, supporting one another. That they were near me not out of convenience but because they loved me. I was wrong. The first cracks appeared quietly. So quietly that at first I did not even realize something was changing. That the atmosphere in the house was shifting. That Stephen's politeness was only a mask, one that would soon begin to slip. Everything changed about 6 months after they moved in. Not suddenly, not sharply, but as if someone were slowly turning a dimmer switch, making the light grow fainter and fainter. I remember the first moment when I felt something was wrong. It was the incident with the couch. We had an old couch in the living room. It had belonged to Victor's parents, then we had it reupholstered, but it was still old and sagging. I had wanted to throw it out and buy a new one for a long time. And one morning at breakfast I finally said it aloud. I was thinking, maybe we should replace the couch in the living room? It is very old now, the springs stick out. I saw a nice one at the store, not expensive. Stephen looked up from his plate and stared at me as if I had said something strange. Mrs. Miller, why would you do that? The couch is perfectly fine. I am very comfortable working on my laptop there in the evenings. I was taken aback. Well, it is old. The springs creak, it is uncomfortable to sit on. Stephen smirked, but there was something unpleasant in that smile. Mrs. Miller, let us be honest, your taste is a bit outdated. I understand you are used to certain things, but times change. Maybe I should decide what gets replaced here and what stays. I have a more modern eye for things. Something tightened inside my chest. Valerie sat beside me, staring at her plate, silent. She did not say, Steve, this is my mother's house, she decides. She said nothing. I said nothing either. I nodded and never mentioned the couch again. It stayed in the living room, old, creaky, sagging. And every time I walked past it, I remembered that conversation and felt bitterness rise inside me. And then there was the incident with Linda. Linda is my friend. We have been close for more than 30 years. After Victor's death, she came to see me several times, supporting me as best she could. I had not seen her for a couple of months after Valerie moved in. Things just never seemed to work out. Then one day she called. Sophie, can I stop by today for an hour? I miss you so much. I was delighted. Of course, Lynn. Come over, we will have tea. Linda arrived around 3 in the afternoon. We sat in the kitchen, I took out a pie and made tea. We chatted, laughed, remembered old times. I felt so good. I had almost forgotten how long it had been since I felt this light, like myself. Then Stephen came home. Earlier than usual, around 5. He walked into the kitchen, saw Linda and me, and his face immediately tightened with displeasure. Mrs. Miller, good evening, he said dryly. Then he turned to me. Could you warn us when you invite guests? I came home from work tired, I wanted to rest in silence, and there are strangers here. Linda flinched. I felt the heat rush to my face. Steve, this is Linda, my friend. We are just having tea. I understand who she is, he interrupted. I am simply asking that next time you give us notice. It is basic courtesy. Linda finished her tea quickly and stood up. Sophie, I should go. Thank you for the tea, she said quietly, avoiding Stephen's eyes. I walked her to the door. She hugged me goodbye and whispered, Stay strong, my dear. When I returned to the kitchen, Valerie was already there. She was washing dishes and, without turning around, said, Mom, really, next time please warn us. It is awkward when people come home and there are outsiders here. I stood there, unable to believe what I was hearing. Outsiders? Linda, an outsider? In my house. Val, this is my home, I said softly. And Linda is not an outsider. She has been my friend for 30 years. Valerie turned around and wiped her hands on a towel. Mom, we all live here now. We need to respect each other. Agreed. I nodded. I went to my bedroom, sat on the bed and cried. Quietly so no one would hear. At that moment I still did not understand that this was only the beginning. That Stephen's polite requests to warn and respect were just the first steps toward me no longer feeling like the owner of my own home. But back then I still believed it was just a misunderstanding. That we were simply adjusting to each other. That everything would work out. I was wrong. A year passed after they moved in. A year during which I slowly, without even realizing it, began to lose control over my own life. It started with a conversation about documents. One evening at dinner, Stephen set his fork aside and looked at me seriously. Mrs. Miller, I was thinking, you still have the property Mr. Miller left you. Those commercial spaces are rented out, right? I nodded. Yes, Victor and I owned commercial property, several units in downtown that we rented out. It brought steady income, a good supplement to my pension. That is right, I said. Why? Stephen smiled, but the smile was businesslike, not warm. You see, this requires attention. Contracts, utilities, taxes, repairs. At your age, this is difficult, isn't it? Let Valerie and me handle it so you are not bothered. You do not need this hassle. I hesitated. On the one hand, he was right. It did require time and attention. Victor had always handled it, and after his death I managed on my own, but it was not easy. Well, maybe that would be convenient, I said uncertainly. Perfect, Stephen said brightly. Then let us arrange a power of attorney for Valerie. She will collect the rental income, pay everything that needs to be paid, and you will simply receive the net income. No problems, no headaches. Valerie nodded and smiled at me. Mom, it really will be easier. We will take care of everything. You will not have to worry at all. I looked at them, my daughter and my son-in-law. They were family. They would not deceive me. Why should I doubt them? All right, I agreed. Let us do it. A few days later, Stephen brought the papers. He placed them on the table in front of me and handed me a pen. Mrs. Miller, here is the power of attorney. Sign here, here, and here, he said, pointing to the lines. I took the pen and glanced at the text. It was full of legal terms, printed in small font. I did not read it carefully. Why would I? This was family. I signed. 3 signatures on 3 pages. Excellent, Stephen said, collecting the documents. Now you do not have to worry. We will handle everything. And I truly stopped worrying. I believed it was care. That they wanted to make my life easier. Then Stephen asked for something else. It was about a month after the power of attorney. Stephen came into the living room where I was reading a book. Mrs. Miller, may I have a moment? I put the book aside. Of course, Steve. What is it? He sat down across from me and folded his hands. You see, I need a place to work. Working from home has become necessary. Projects, documents, calls. And I do not have a proper office. So I was thinking, maybe I could use Mr. Miller's study? It is empty anyway. Victor's study. His sacred place. His books stood there, his desk, photographs from our travels on the walls. It smelled of his cologne. I did not go in there often. It hurt too much. But I never wanted to touch anything either. It was all that remained of him. I do not know, I began. Mrs. Miller, I understand this is difficult for you, he said gently. But think about it, the room is just sitting there collecting dust. And I need somewhere to work. It would be very convenient. I promise I will treat everything with care. I stayed silent, struggling with myself. On the one hand, it was Victor's memory. On the other, Stephen was right, the room really was unused. All right, I finally said. Fine. Use it. Stephen smiled. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. You are very understanding. He left. And I sat there feeling something inside me tighten with pain. A week later I went into the study, and froze. All of Victor's things were gone. The books, the photographs, his desk items. Everything had disappeared. In their place stood a new computer, a printer, business folders. The walls were bare. The room felt impersonal and cold, much like a corporate office. I found Stephen in the living room. Steve, where are Victor's things? His books, his photographs. He looked at me with surprise. Oh, that. I moved everything to the garage, Mrs. Miller. They were in the way, gathering dust. I cleared the space for work. You did say I could use the study. But I did not say you could remove his things. My voice trembled. Stephen sighed. Mrs. Miller, come on. They are just things. Mr. Miller is gone anyway. Why keep all of this? You know yourself that you have to move on, not cling to the past. I stood there, unable to speak. My throat tightened with tears. Valerie came out of the kitchen and saw my face. Mom, what happened? Valerie, he removed Dad's things, I forced out. He took everything to the garage. Without asking. Valerie looked at Stephen, then at me. Mom, well, they are just things. Dad is gone anyway. Stephen needs a workspace, right? Do not get so upset over this. I looked at my daughter. At my own daughter who should have stood on my side. Who should have understood how much it hurt. But she stood with her husband. I turned around and went to my bedroom. I closed the door, lay down on the bed and cried. Quietly into the pillow so no one would hear. That day I lost the last thing that connected me to Victor in this house. His study. His space. His memory. And I did nothing to stop it. I just stayed silent and cried. Another 6 months passed. A year and a half since they had moved in. And during that time the atmosphere in the house changed completely. Stephen no longer asked for permission. He simply did whatever he thought was right. One day I came home from the store and discovered that the living room had been rearranged. The couch I had once wanted to throw out was moved to the window. Victor's armchair, where I loved to sit in the evenings, was pushed into a corner. The coffee table had been swapped with the television stand. I stood in the middle of the living room and did not recognize my home. "Steve," I called. "Who rearranged the furniture?" Stephen came out of the study, that very study that had once been Victor's. "Oh, that. I did, Mrs. Miller. It is more convenient this way. The light falls better and it is easier for me to watch television from the couch after work." "But you could have at least asked," I said quietly. He smirked. "Mrs. Miller, why? These are small things. Furniture can always be moved back if needed. Do not worry so much." But the furniture was never moved back. It stayed exactly the way Stephen found convenient. And then the barbecue started. Stephen invited his friends over for the weekend. 5 or 6 people. They arrived with beer, meat, loud music. They settled in the garden, the very garden Victor had loved more than anything. The music blared until late at night. They laughed, shouted, grilled meat. I lay in my bedroom and could not sleep. One thought kept spinning in my head. This is Victor's garden. His apple trees. His roses. And now strangers are trampling it, littering, making noise. At some point I could not take it anymore. I went downstairs, walked into the garden and approached Stephen. "Steve, could I speak to you for a moment?" He stepped away from the group and came over to me. "Yes, Mrs. Miller? Could you ask them to turn the music down a little? I cannot sleep. It is already 11 o'clock. Stephen looked at me as if I had asked for something impossible. "Mrs. Miller, come on. You only live once. Relax a little. We do not do this every day. Just bear with it for a bit, we will be done soon." But they were not done soon. The music blasted until 1 in the morning. I did not sleep at all. In the morning when I went out into the garden, plastic cups, cigarette butts and chip bags were scattered everywhere. The lawn was trampled. I picked up the trash while tears streamed down my face. It was Victor's garden. His love. His work. And now they were holding drunken parties there. Things changed at the table too. Stephen had long since taken the head of the table, the place where Victor used to sit. Valerie sat to his right. Matthew and Regina across from them. And somehow, quietly and gradually, I was moved to the corner. Closer to the kitchen. "It is more convenient for you, Mrs. Miller," Stephen would say. "Closer to the stove, you do not have to walk far for seconds." And I sat in the corner, like hired help, jumping up whenever someone needed salt, bread, napkins, clearing plates while everyone else was still sitting and talking. Then Stephen started making remarks. "Mrs. Miller, you oversalted the soup again. Less salt next time, please. Mrs. Miller, the potatoes are a bit dry. Maybe simmer them longer next time. Mrs. Miller, maybe you should rest? You look tired." That last phrase sounded caring. But I heard something else in it. A hint. A hint at my age. At the idea that I was old, weak, unnecessary. Valerie stayed silent. Always silent. Even when Stephen spoke to me that way, she lowered her eyes and pretended not to hear. The grandchildren began to change as well. Matthew no longer helped in the garden. When I asked him to rake the leaves, he waved me off. "Grandma, I do not have time. I am busy." Regina stopped coming to me with her homework. She stayed in her room with her phone, and when I came in to talk, she did not even look up. "Grandma, I am busy. Later, okay?" They were drifting away. They stopped seeing me as a person. I was becoming background. A convenient grandmother who cooks, cleans, does the laundry, and does not get in the way. And I stayed silent. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I said the wrong thing, if I protested, if I demanded respect, they would leave. And I would be alone again in the empty house. I did not understand then that loneliness in an empty house can be less frightening than loneliness in a house full of people who do not see you. But I learned that later. Much later. 2 years passed since they moved in. 2 years during which I gradually turned from the owner of the house into an invisible shadow, existing somewhere on the edge of someone else's life. The grandchildren grew completely distant. Matthew turned 19, Regina 16. They grew up, became teenagers with their own interests, their own friends, their own world. A world where there was no place for me. I remember one incident that cut especially deep. I was making dinner as usual, chopping vegetables for a salad. Matthew walked past into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator and took out some juice. I turned to him and smiled. "Matt, how are things at college? You had an exam this week, didn't you?" He did not even look at me. He drank straight from the carton and muttered, "Grandma, leave me alone. I am busy." Then he went to his room. The door slammed. I stood there with the knife in my hand and felt something painfully tighten inside me. Once he used to hug me, ask for advice, laugh at my jokes. Now I had become an obstacle. An annoying old woman best kept at a distance. With Regina it was even worse. She stopped talking to me altogether. She came home from school, walked past me in the hallway without saying hello. I said, "Gina, how are you? How is school?" She did not stop. She simply went upstairs without turning around and disappeared into her room. The door closed. That was all. I tried to understand, what had I done wrong? Why had they changed so much? But I found no answers. They simply adopted Stephen's attitude. If he spoke to me like hired help, then it was acceptable. If he ignored my opinion, then they could too. Children always copy adults. And Matthew and Regina copied the disregard. Then came the incident with the dishes. I had spent the entire day on my feet, cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. By evening, my back hurt so badly that I could barely move. After dinner, I asked Stephen. For the first time in a long while, I asked for help. "Steve, could you please not leave dirty dishes in the sink tonight? My back hurts terribly and it is hard for me to wash them." He looked up from his phone and stared at me as if I had asked for the moon. "Mrs. Miller, are you serious right now?" Irritation crept into his voice. "I worked all day. I am exhausted. Is it really that hard for you to wash a couple of plates? You're at home all day anyway." I stood there in silence. I could not force a single word out. "And honestly," he continued, "you sit at home. What do you even do all day? Cooking? That's hardly work at all. I am the one who actually gets tired." Valerie was sitting next to him at the table, looking at her phone. Silent. I turned around and went to the sink, turned on the water, started washing the dishes. Tears ran down my cheeks, mixing with the soap on my hands. Home all day. What do I do all day? I woke up at 6 every morning, made breakfast for everyone, cleaned up after everyone, washed their clothes, ironed them, went to the store, cooked lunch, cooked dinner, mopped the floors, dusted the furniture. Every single day. No days off. No gratitude. And he said it was not hard work. That night I could not sleep for a long time. I lay in the dark and thought, how did I get to this point? How did I allow them to turn me into unpaid help? And the worst part was that I did not know how to stop it. A few more months passed. Almost 3 years since they moved in. And Stephen no longer even tried to hide his contempt. One day he invited his colleagues over. 4 of them. They arrived in the evening and settled into the living room. As usual, I cooked, set the table, brought out snacks, tea, a pie. Stephen sat in an armchair telling something funny. Everyone laughed. I placed the tray with tea on the table and was about to leave, when Stephen called out to me, "Mrs. Miller, stay for a moment." I stopped and turned around. He smiled at his colleagues and said, gesturing toward me, "Meet Mrs. Miller, our housekeeper. She's pure gold. She cooks, cleans, does everything herself. We would be completely lost without her." They laughed. Someone said, "You are lucky." Stephen nodded. "Very lucky. Imagine, no need to hire a housekeeper. Everything is already taken care of." More laughter. I stood there, my face burning with shame. He spoke about me as if I were hired help. A maid. Not the owner of the house. Not the grandmother of his children. Not his mother-in-law. I turned and quickly left the living room. Went upstairs to my bedroom. Closed the door. Sat down on the bed. And for the first time in a long while I allowed myself to think it. I hate him. I hate this man who came into my home and turned my life into hell. But the worst was what happened with the garden. One spring day I decided to plant new flowers. Victor had always planted tulips by the entrance. Red and yellow ones. After his death, they slowly withered and I wanted to renew the flower bed. I bought bulbs and prepared my tools. I went out into the garden and saw Stephen there. He was working by the far wall handling bricks. "Steve, what are you doing?" I asked. He turned around and wiped sweat from his forehead. "Oh, Mrs. Miller. I decided to make a barbecue area here. Lay some bricks, put up a canopy. It will be convenient when friends come over." I looked at the place where he was working. It was where Victor's roses had grown. His favorite roses. The ones he planted with his own hands and cared for over the years. "Steve, but the roses were there," I said quietly. He waved his hand. "I already dug them up. They were old, not very attractive. This space is better used properly." I felt something inside me break. "You dug up Victor's roses?" "Yeah," he shrugged. "Mrs. Miller, let me decide what should be planted here and what should not. You do not really have the strength for gardening anymore. And I need this area for barbecues. My friends will like it." I stood there with the tulip bulbs in my hands, unable to speak. Victor's roses. The last memory of him in this house. His work. His love. And Stephen dug them up. Just like that. To build a barbecue area. "You had no right," I forced out. "It was his garden. His roses." Stephen looked at me, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Mrs. Miller, stop clinging to the past. Mr. Miller has been gone for 3 years. Life goes on. A garden should be used, not turned into a museum." He turned away and went back to his work. I stood there for a few more minutes. Then I turned around, went back into the house, went up to my bedroom, lay down on the bed and cried. For a long time. Bitterly. That day I lost the last thing that connected me to Victor. The garden. His roses. His memory. And I understood something then. Stephen had not just taken over my home. He had destroyed everything that mattered to me. He erased Victor from this space. He erased me. He turned my home into his kingdom, where I was nothing more than a shadow, tolerated out of pity. But I still stayed silent. I still endured. Because I did not know how to stop it. The 4th anniversary of their move-in was approaching. For years I had lived in my own house as a stranger. For years of enduring, staying quiet, stepping back. For years of hoping that somehow everything would fix itself. But nothing improved. It only grew worse. I began noticing strange things with the money. Before, income from the rental properties came into my account. The units Victor and I rented out. A steady amount every month. Not huge but respectable. Together with my pension, it was more than enough to live comfortably. But over the past few months, the amount had become smaller. At first I thought I was mistaken. Then I checked the statement. No, it really was less. Almost a third less than before. I did not understand what was going on. Valerie was managing it under the power of attorney. She was supposed to be monitoring everything. Maybe the tenants were late with payments? Or there were unexpected expenses. One morning when Valerie and I were alone in the kitchen, I asked cautiously, "Val, tell me, why is less money coming in from the rentals? Did something happen?" She did not even look up from her phone. "Oh, Mom, there were repairs. One unit needed major work, we had to put money into it. Plus utilities went up, taxes. And in general there are a lot of expenses. Do not worry, everything is under control." She said it so lightly, so casually, as if it were not my money she was talking about, but something trivial. "Could I see the documents?" I asked. "Receipts, repair contracts? Just so I understand where it is going." Valerie finally looked up, a hint of irritation in her eyes. "Mom, why? I told you everything is fine. Do you not trust me? Stephen controls all of this, he knows what he is doing. Do not dig through paperwork. It is complicated and boring. Just live peacefully. Live peacefully. As if it were not my money. Not my property. As if I should simply sit quietly and not ask questions." I said nothing. I did not insist. But a seed of doubt settled firmly inside me. Something was wrong. Something did not add up. And Stephen was becoming increasingly bold. I remember one time I was cooking lunch and needed salt. I asked Regina, who was sitting at the table with her phone, "Gina, could you pass me the salt, please?" She did not move. Stephen, who was reading the newspaper, smirked and said loudly, Mrs. Miller, are you sure you counted the change correctly at the store yesterday? Valerie said you brought back 20 cents less. Is it not a bit embarrassing at your age to make mistakes like that? Matthew, who was walking past, snickered. I froze by the stove. 20 cents. He publicly, in front of my grandchildren, humiliated me over 20 cents. And with a clear hint about my age, as if I were old, forgetful, incapable of basic things. I did not make a mistake, I said quietly without turning around. I always count. Well, maybe next time you will be more careful, Stephen continued, rustling the newspaper. It gets awkward otherwise. Valerie was sitting right there at the table. Silent. I turned off the stove, left the kitchen, went upstairs to my room and sat on the bed staring at the wall. 20 cents. Over 20 cents. He humiliated me in front of my grandchildren. To show them, look at her. Old. Forgetful. Useless. And the grandchildren saw it. Absorbed it. Learned from him how one can treat a grandmother. Another time Stephen threw something like a house party. He invited his friends and a few colleagues. About 8 people gathered. As usual, I cooked, set the table, sliced appetizers, carried plates. Everyone sat in the living room talking and laughing. I brought out another dish and placed it on the table. I was about to leave when Stephen called out again. Mrs. Miller, wait just a second. I turned around. He was sitting in Victor's armchair, a glass of wine in his hand, smiling at his guests. Take a look, he said, gesturing toward me. This is Mrs. Miller, the owner of the house. She is 70 years old but still going strong. She does everything around the house herself. Of course, she gets tired. Age is starting to take its toll. But we take care of her. We try. The guests nodded. Someone said, well done. Stephen continued, enjoying the attention. Yes, we are lucky. Imagine this. We live here, she feeds us, cleans up after us. An ideal situation, right? The only downside is that she is starting to get forgetful sometimes. I have said it before, age. And he laughed. Lightly. Casually. The guest smiled politely. And I stood in the middle of the living room, feeling everything inside me tighten with humiliation. He spoke about me as if I were not a person but an object. A convenient, useful object that was starting to malfunction with age. I turned around and left. Went upstairs. Lay down on the bed without even undressing. And for the first time in a long while I thought, what if I leave? Just pack my things and go somewhere. Rent an apartment. Live alone like before. But where would I go? With what money? Valerie controlled my finances. Stephen sat in my house. The grandchildren had turned away from me. Even Victor's garden was no longer mine. I was trapped. Trapped in my own home. And I did not know how to get out. That night I did not sleep for a long time. I lay in the dark, thoughts spinning one after another. How did I get to this point? When did I stop being the owner of my own life? When did I allow them to turn me into a servant? And most importantly, how could I stop it? By morning I had no answer. I got up as usual at 6. Made breakfast. Set the table. Cleared the dishes. And everything continued as before. Humiliating. Hopeless. Gray. But then I did not yet know that everything was about to change. That in just a few weeks, something would happen that would turn my life upside down. That I would finally find the strength to say, enough. That evening began like any other. Nothing suggested it would become a turning point. As always, I was making dinner. Roasting chicken with vegetables, preparing a salad, setting the table. Stephen came home from work in a good mood. He had closed some deal and was pleased with himself. Valerie was setting the table. Matthew and Regina came downstairs for dinner. Everyone sat down. Stephen at the head of the table, Valerie to his right, the children across from them. Me as usual in the corner, right by the kitchen. Stephen opened a bottle of wine and poured for himself and Valerie. He was relaxed, talkative. He talked about work, joked. Everyone listened and laughed. I sat quietly eating my portion. I felt as if I were not really there. As if I were just part of the decor, background no one paid attention to. Stephen took a sip of wine, leaned back in his chair and looked at me. Something mocking flashed in his eyes. Mrs. Miller, he said loudly so everyone could hear. Tell me, why are you even sitting at the table with us? I looked up, not understanding where this was going. What do you mean, why? I asked. He smirked and took another sip of wine. Well, you were running back and forth anyway. Bringing salt, adding bread, clearing plates. Maybe it would be more convenient for you to stay in the kitchen altogether? At least you would not have to get up every time. Valerie froze with her fork in midair. Matthew snorted, staring into his plate. Regina glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I stayed silent. I did not know what to say. Stephen continued, clearly enjoying the moment. His voice was light, as if he were joking, but there was something hard and cruel underneath it. Come on, Mrs. Miller, do not be offended. I am just saying it like it is. You understand, at your age, socializing isn't really your thing anymore. He took another sip of wine, then turned to Valerie and Matthew, smiling broadly as if about to deliver his best line. Just look at this. Is that useless old woman here again? Matthew snorted, covering his mouth with his hand. Regina stared at her plate, but the corners of her lips twitched. She was barely holding back a smile. Valerie lowered her eyes. Silent. No one said a word. No one stood up for me. No one said, Steve, stop, this is inappropriate. No one. I sat there, feeling something inside me slowly but irreversibly crack in half. As if something huge and vital was breaking at that very second. Completely. Beyond repair. A useless old woman. That is what he called me. In front of everyone. In front of my daughter, who was born and raised in this house. In front of my grandchildren, whom I loved with all my heart. And everyone laughed. I finished my dinner in silence. Said nothing. Stood up and began clearing the table. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay composed. I carried the plates to the kitchen. Washed the dishes. Wiped the table. Everything as usual. Mechanically. Then I went upstairs to my bedroom. Closed the door. Lay down on the bed without undressing. And I could not fall asleep. All night. I just lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. One thought kept circling in my mind. Useless old woman. That is who I had become in their eyes. Not a grandmother. Not a mother. Not the owner of the house. But a useless old woman tolerated out of pity. How did I get to this point? How did I allow them to treat me this way? I kept replaying how it all began. How they moved in, polite, caring. How Stephen addressed me formally, thanked me for dinners. How Matthew helped in the garden. How Regina did her homework at the kitchen table. How Valerie drank tea with me and talked for hours. When did everything change? When did I stop being a person and become a convenient object? And most importantly, when did I stop resisting? The couch. I stayed silent when Stephen said my taste was outdated. Linda. I stayed silent when he pushed my friend out of my own home. The power of attorney. I signed without reading because I trusted them. Victor's study. I stayed silent when he removed all my husband's things. The garden. I stayed silent when he dug up Victor's roses. I stayed silent. Again and again. Year after year. I stepped back, gave in, endured. And this is where it led. To my son-in-law calling me a useless old woman at my own table, in my own home, bought with my husband's money. And my daughter stayed silent. My grandchildren laughed. Tears ran down my cheeks, but I did not wipe them away. I just lay there and cried. Quietly so no one would hear. And by morning something had changed. The tears dried up. And in their place came something else. Something hard. Cold. Determined. Enough. I got out of bed and went to the window. Dawn was breaking. The city was waking up. Life was going on as usual. But for me nothing was usual anymore. I understood I could not live like this any longer. I could not endure humiliation. I could not be invisible in my own home. I could not allow them to treat me like hired help. There had to be something I could do. There had to be a way out. And then I remembered. Michael Sullivan. A lawyer. Victor's friend. He helped us with the properties when we handled the paperwork many years ago. He knew our entire financial history. He was an honest, decent man. If anyone could help me, it was him. I took my phone and found his number in my old contacts. I stared at the screen for a long time, gathering my courage. Then I pressed call. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Hello, A man's voice answered. Mr. Sullivan? This is Sophia Miller. I am Victor Miller's widow. Do you remember me? Pause. Of course I remember you, Mrs. Miller. Oh. How are you? Did something happen? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mr. Sullivan, I need help. I need to meet with you. As soon as possible. This is very important. He was silent for a second, then spoke seriously. All right. Come to my office today at 3 in the afternoon. Same address. I will make time. Is it something serious? Very, I managed to say. Then I will see you, Mrs. Miller. Everything will be fine. He hung up. I lowered the phone and sat on the bed. My hands were shaking. For the first time in 4 years I took a step forward. I did not retreat. I did not stay silent. I did not endure. I asked for help. And for some reason I knew for certain, after that meeting my life would never be the same. That morning I went downstairs for breakfast as usual. Pretended nothing had happened. Made scrambled eggs, brewed coffee, set the table. Stephen was reading the news on his phone. Valerie was getting Regina ready for school. Matthew was still asleep. No one mentioned last night's dinner. No one apologized. As if nothing had happened. I silently poured coffee for everyone, set out the plates. Sat in my usual place in the corner. Ate without a word. But my mind already had a plan. At 10 in the morning, when everyone had left for the day, I got dressed, took my purse and left the house. I told Valerie I was going to a routine doctor's appointment. All right, Mom, she nodded, not looking up from her computer. Do not be long. I went outside, caught a taxi and gave the address of Michael Sullivan's office. The entire ride I was nervous. My hands were sweating. Thoughts spun in my head. What if I am overreacting? What if it is not that bad? What if I am exaggerating? But then I remembered last night. Stephen's voice. The laughter. Valerie's silence. And I understood, no, I was not exaggerating. It really was that bad. Mr. Sullivan's office was located in downtown, in an old building with high ceilings. I went up to the 3rd floor, found the right door and rang the bell. Come in, a voice called. I entered. The office was spacious and bright with bookshelves lining the walls. Behind a large wooden desk sat Michael Sullivan, a man in his mid-50s, graying, wearing glasses with intelligent, attentive eyes. He stood up as I came in and extended his hand. Mrs. Miller, hello. Please come in, have a seat. I sat down in the chair across from him. He returned to his desk, folded his hands and looked at me closely. What happened? You said on the phone that it was urgent. I opened my mouth and suddenly could not speak. My throat tightened. Tears welled up in my eyes. Mr. Sullivan waited. He did not rush me. He took a box of tissues from the drawer and handed it to me. I took one, wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. Mr. Sullivan, I do not know where to begin, I finally said. After Victor's death, my daughter and her family have been living in my house for 4 years now. And everything has gone wrong. He nodded, listening carefully. I told him everything. About the move-in. About how Stephen gradually began acting like the owner. About the power of attorney I signed. About Victor's study, about the garden, about the humiliations. About being moved to the corner at the table. About the remarks, the jabs, the mockery. About the grandchildren growing distant. About Valerie always staying silent. About last night's dinner when Stephen called me a useless old woman. I spoke for a long time, unevenly, sometimes crying. Mr. Sullivan listened, made notes in a notebook, did not interrupt. When I finished, he set the pen aside, took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Miller, he said seriously, what you are describing is emotional abuse. Systematic humiliation, deprivation of dignity. This is unacceptable. But what worries me most is something else. That power of attorney you signed. I flinched. What is wrong with it? I need to review the documents, he said. Bring me everything you have. Copies of the power of attorney, bank statements, contracts, anything related to the properties. I am concerned there may be a far more serious issue here than simple rental management. A chill ran through me. You think they are doing something wrong with the money? Mr. Sullivan looked straight at me. I am not making accusations yet. But experience tells me that when someone behaves this way, confidently occupying someone else's space, isolating a person from finances, from friends, from control over their own life, it is often accompanied by financial abuse. Let us check. And if there is a problem, we will deal with it. I nodded. My hands were trembling. What should I do? Go home. Gather every document you can find. Powers of attorney, bank statements, property contracts. Bring everything to me tomorrow. I will request information from the bank and the notary's office. Then in a few days we will meet again. I will review everything thoroughly. Agreed. Agreed, I whispered. I stood up. He walked me to the door. Mrs. Miller, he said before I left. You did the right thing by coming. It was a brave step. The most important thing now is not to back down. Stay strong. I nodded and left. All the way home I thought about one thing. What would he find in those documents? What exactly had Stephen and Valerie done? At home I waited until everyone went about their business. Then I quietly went into the study, the same room that had once been Victor's. Stephen was at work. I opened the desk drawers and found a folder with documents. Powers of attorney, contracts, papers with stamps. I did not understand much, but I took everything that looked important. Then I went into my bedroom, took out an old box where Victor's and my documents were kept. I found bank statements, property contracts. I put everything into a large envelope. The next day I again said I was going to the doctor. I went back to see Mr. Sullivan and handed him the envelope with the documents. Excellent, he said. I will review all of this and request official records as well. Give me 3 days. Come back on Friday at 2 in the afternoon. I will prepare a full report. For 3 days I lived on edge. I walked around, cooked, cleaned, but my mind was elsewhere. I was afraid. Afraid of learning the truth. But at the same time I knew that not knowing was worse. Stephen noticed nothing. He behaved as usual. Careless, dismissive. At dinner he made another remark. Mrs. Miller, the meat is a bit dry. Next time let it stew longer. I nodded silently. But inside, the obedience I once felt was gone. Something else was growing there. Determined. I looked at him and thought, just a little longer. Just a little more and I will know the truth. And then everything will change. On Friday I went back to see Mr. Sullivan. He greeted me with a serious expression. A thick folder of documents lay on his desk. Sit down, Mrs. Miller, he said. What I discovered will shock you. I sat down. My heart was pounding wildly. Mr. Sullivan opened the folder, took out several pages and placed them in front of me. Mrs. Miller, do you remember signing as a guarantor on a loan? I frowned. What guarantor agreement? I do not remember anything like that. He nodded. Exactly. But here is the document. 3 years ago, you became a guarantor on Stephen Davis's loan in the amount of $100,000. The loan was supposedly taken out for business development. I stared at the paper. My signature was there. But I had no memory of signing it. How is that possible? I do not remember. Most likely this document was slipped in among other papers when you were signing the power of attorney. You signed several pages in a row, correct? I nodded. Yes. That day Stephen brought a stack of papers and I signed everything without reading closely. I will continue, Mr. Sullivan said darkly. The business for which the loan was taken failed. The debt did not decrease. On the contrary, it grew. At this point, with interest and late fees, the amount has reached $120,000. $120,000. My head began to spin. But I knew nothing about this. How could that be? Mr. Sullivan took out another document. Because the loan payments have been coming from your money. From the rental income of your properties. Valerie, having the power of attorney, has been transferring money every month to service this loan. Without your knowledge. For the past 3 years, your money has been used to cover Stephen's debt. I could not breathe. My ears were ringing. That is impossible. Val could not do that. She is my daughter. Look at the statements, he said, pointing to the figures. Here are the rental deposits. And here are the monthly withdrawals. to the bank toward the loan. Regularly. For 3 consecutive years. I stared at the numbers. Everything blurred before my eyes. They robbed me, I whispered. For 3 years they stole my money. Mr. Sullivan nodded. Yes. And the most dangerous part is this. As a guarantor, you bear full responsibility for the debt. If the payments stop, the bank has the right to go after your assets. Your house. I covered my face with my hands and burst into tears. It was too much. Too terrifying. Too much betrayal. My daughter. My Valerie, whom I gave birth to and raised, whom I helped all my life. She had been stealing from me for years. Hiding behind care, love, family. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Sullivan said firmly. Listen to me. This is financial abuse. This is fraud. And we are going to fight it. I know what to do. I raised my head and wiped my tears. What can I do? He slid a sheet of paper with an action plan closer to me. First, we revoke the guarantor agreement. Given your age and the circumstances, I will negotiate with the bank. I have connections. We will prove that you were misled. Second, we revoke all powers of attorney. Every single one. Third, we block Valerie's and Stephen's access to your accounts. Change all passwords and access codes. You will become the only person controlling your money. All of this can be done within a week. And then, I asked hoarsely, and then we tell them everything. In my presence officially. And you issue an ultimatum. What kind of ultimatum? Mr. Sullivan looked me straight in the eyes. Either they accept the new rules of your home, respect transparency, and Stephen repays his debt himself, or you evict them from the house and file a lawsuit to recover damages. The choice will be theirs. I sat there absorbing what I had just heard. A week ago I was a broken old woman afraid to object. And now my lawyer was offering me a battle plan. Mrs. Miller, he said more gently, you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to dignity. This is your home, your money, your life. It is time to take back control. I took a deep breath, wiped away the last of my tears, looked at him. Let us begin. The following week was the most intense of my life. Mr. Sullivan acted quickly and decisively. On Monday, we filed a request with the bank to revoke the guarantor agreement. He personally met with the bank's management, explained the situation, and provided evidence of my age and the fact that I had been misled. 3 days later, the bank agreed. The guarantor agreement was revoked. The debt was now Stephen's problem alone. On Tuesday, Mr. Sullivan annulled all powers of attorney, officially through a notary. Valerie no longer had the right to manage my money, my property, or my accounts. On Wednesday, we went to the bank. We changed all passwords, revoked access for everyone except me, and blocked the card Valerie had been using. I became the only person who could manage my finances. Every evening, I came home and acted as if everything was normal. I cooked dinner, cleaned, stayed silent. Stephen noticed nothing. Valerie did not either. They continued living their lives, unaware that the ground beneath them was already giving way. On Thursday, Mr. Sullivan called me. Mrs. Miller, everything is ready. On Monday at 2 in the afternoon, I will come to your house. Tell Stephen and Valerie that there will be an important meeting. Make sure they are both at home. I agreed. On Friday evening at dinner, I said calmly, Valerie, Stephen, on Monday at 2 in the afternoon, a lawyer will be coming to our house. Michael Sullivan. He wants to discuss some issues related to the property. Stephen looked up from his plate and stared at me in surprise. What lawyer? Why? Just legal matters, I replied evenly. Some things need to be clarified. Please be at home. Valerie frowned. Mom, couldn't you handle this yourself? Why bring in a lawyer? It is more convenient for me this way, I said. Please make sure you are both home at 2. Stephen shrugged. Fine. We will be. I spent the weekend in constant tension. I barely slept. I rehearsed in my head what I would say, how I would behave. I was afraid I would not be able to hold myself together, that I would break down and cry. But Mr. Sullivan had told me beforehand. Mrs. Miller, the most important thing is to stay calm. Do not justify yourself. Do not apologize. You did nothing wrong. They broke the law. They betrayed your trust. Remember that. I repeated those words like a mantra. On Monday, exactly at 2 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. Mr. Sullivan stood on the threshold, a leather briefcase in his hand. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller," he said formally. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "I am." We went into the living room. Stephen was sitting in an armchair, Valerie on the couch. Both looked tense. Mr. Sullivan greeted them, introduced himself, sat at the table, opened his briefcase and took out a folder of documents. "I asked Mrs. Miller to arrange this meeting in order to discuss serious legal matters," he began calmly. "Matters concerning Mrs. Miller's finances and property." Stephen crossed his arms over his chest. "And what kind of matters would those be?" Mr. Sullivan opened the folder, took out a document and placed it on the table. 3 years ago, Mrs. Miller became a guarantor on your loan in the amount of $100,000. Do you remember that, Mr. Davis? Stephen stiffened. Valerie turned pale. Yes, there was a loan. For the business. The business failed, Mr. Sullivan continued coldly. The debt was not repaid. Moreover, it increased to $120,000 with interest and late fees. And for the past 3 years, the payments on this loan were made not by you, but from Mrs. Miller's funds. Through the power of attorney held by Valerie Davis. Silence filled the room. Valerie stared at the floor. Stephen clenched his jaw. It was temporary, he began. I had difficulties. You systematically, over the course of 3 years, used Mrs. Miller's money to pay your debts without informing her, Mr. Sullivan interrupted. That is fraud. It is a criminal offense. Valerie lifted her head, tears in her eyes. Mom, I did not want this. Stephen said it would only be for a short time, that he would repay everything soon. I stayed silent. I looked at both of them and felt no pity, only cold anger. Mr. Sullivan continued. Mrs. Miller has revoked the guarantor agreement. The bank has agreed. The debt is now exclusively your responsibility, Mr. Davis. All powers of attorney have also been annulled. Ms. Davis no longer has any access to Mrs. Miller's accounts or property. Stephen jumped up from the armchair. What is this, Mrs. Miller? What the hell is this? Are you trying to throw us out? I stood up and looked him straight in the eyes. For the first time in 4 years, directly, firmly, without fear. I want you to stop treating me like a servant, I said quietly but clearly. I want to be respected in my own home. I want my life back under my control. Stephen opened his mouth, but Mr. Sullivan raised his hand. Mrs. Miller has an ultimatum for you. Either you agree to the new conditions or you leave this house and she files a lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. What conditions? Stephen exploded. Mr. Sullivan took out a sheet of paper and read aloud. First, full respect toward Mrs. Miller. No humiliation, no jabs, no condescending tone. Second, Mr. Davis repays his debt to the bank independently. Mrs. Miller has no involvement in it. Third, full financial transparency. All expenses are discussed with Mrs. Miller. Fourth, Mrs. Miller regains her voice in this household. This is her home and she is the owner. Fifth, family therapy. All family members attend counseling to rebuild relationships. Stephen looked at us with hatred. This is blackmail. This is justice, Mr. Sullivan replied calmly. You have 2 days to decide. Either you agree or you pack your things. Valerie broke down in tears. Mom, I am sorry. I did not think it would turn out like this. Forgive me. I looked at my daughter. At the woman I gave birth to, raised, loved with my whole heart. Who had been stealing from me for 3 years. Val, you stayed silent while your husband humiliated me. You allowed him to turn me into a servant. You stole my money. And all this time you said you loved me. That is not love. That is betrayal. She cried, covering her face with her hands. Mr. Sullivan stood up and gathered the documents. I will expect your decision on Wednesday. Goodbye. He left. I walked him to the door, then returned to the living room. Stephen and Valerie sat there, confused and crushed. I walked past them, went up to my bedroom and closed the door. And for the first time in 4 years I slept peacefully. Because I knew I had taken my life back. On Wednesday, exactly at 10 in the morning, there was a knock on my bedroom door. I opened it. Valerie and Stephen were standing there. Both pale, dark circles under their eyes. It was obvious they had not slept these 2 days. "Mom," Valerie said quietly. "May we come in?" I nodded and let them in. We went down to the living room and sat at the table. The same table where, just a week earlier, Stephen had called me a useless old woman. Stephen stared at the floor, his hands clenched into fists. Valerie cried softly, wiping away tears. "We agree," Stephen said dully without lifting his eyes. "To all the conditions. We agree." I remained silent, waiting. "Mrs. Miller, I was wrong." He finally looked up at me. In his eyes there was anger, resentment, and something else. Fear. "I behaved terribly. I had no right to treat you that way. I am sorry." His voice was strained, but he said it. For the first time in 4 years he apologized. Valerie grabbed my hand. "Mom, forgive me. Please forgive me. I was weak. A coward. I saw what was happening and stayed silent. I let him humiliate you. I stole your money. I do not know how I became this person. But I want to fix everything. Give me a chance, Mom. Please." I looked at my daughter. At her tear-streaked face. And I did not know what I felt. Anger? Pity? Relief? "Val, I do not know if I can forgive you," I said softly. "I do not know if I will ever be able to trust you again. But I will give you one chance. But if you break even one condition, you leave. Forever. I will not tolerate humiliation anymore. Do you understand?" They both nodded. "We understand," Valerie whispered. I called Mr. Sullivan. He arrived an hour later with a contract. Stephen and Valerie signed it, committing to all the conditions. Mr. Sullivan also announced an additional decision. Mrs. Miller is establishing a dedicated trust fund for the grandchildren, Matthew and Regina. The money is strictly for their education. The parents have no access to this fund. Only upon reaching the age of majority and only for schooling. Stephen clenched his teeth but nodded. That was how a new life began. Slowly, painfully, through effort and setbacks. We started family therapy. Once a week, all of us together. The therapist, a middle-aged woman, firm but fair, directly called Stephen's behavior economic and emotional abuse. He sat with clenched fists, but he listened. Valerie cried during every session, realizing the depth of her betrayal. The children began to change as well. Matthew and Regina did not understand at first what had happened. But gradually, through therapy and conversations, they began to see the whole picture. One day Regina came up to me in the kitchen, hugged me and whispered, "Grandma, I am sorry. I was stupid." Matthew started helping in the garden again. Silently, but he helped. Together we planted new roses, in memory of Victor. Stephen found a job, not prestigious but stable. He began repaying the loan on his own. At home he became polite and restrained. He no longer allowed himself any jabs or remarks. And I reclaimed my life. My bedroom, the one I had shared with Victor. My seat at the table at the head. My right to have a voice. The right to decide what happens in my home. I invited Linda over for tea again. We sat in the kitchen, talked, laughed. No one dared tell me that I should have warned them. I reclaimed my garden. I tended it every day. Stephen dismantled his barbecue area. Without arguments. 6 months passed. The relationships remained tense but stable. Valerie tried to make amends. She helped me, asked for permission, sought my advice. Stephen kept his distance but remained respectful. One evening, Valerie came into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. "Mom, I want you to know. I understand now. I understand how deeply I hurt you. And I will spend my whole life trying to make it right." I looked at my daughter. At the woman who had once been my little girl. Who betrayed me. And who was now trying to earn back my love. "Val," I said, "I do not know if everything will ever be the same. But I see that you are trying. And that matters." He hugged me. We both cried. This story did not end with a fairy tale happy ending. But it ended with me reclaiming my dignity. I stopped being invisible. I became the owner of my life again. At 70, I found the strength to say, enough. And that changed everything. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. Write in the comments which moment touched you the most. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss new stories. Leave a like if you believe it is never too late to reclaim your voice and your dignity. And before you go, watch the story we have left here on the screen. We are sure it will make you think and move you as well.